Welcome to the Regulation Podcast, brought to you by the Institute of Regulation. Once again, we hope this podcast will help you understand more about the regulation sector and, of course, why it increasingly matters to the public. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today's discussion will explore what makes good regulation strategy and find out why regulators must ensure their strategies are flexible and agile enough to meet the changing demands of society and modern industry. To discuss this challenge, my guest today is Andrea Sutcliffe CBE, Chief Executive and Registrar of the Nursing and Midwifery Council, the independent regulator for nurses and midwives in the UK and nursing associates in England. The NMC regulates over 800,000 professionals with a vision to ensure safe, effective and kind nursing and midwifery practice that improves everyone's health and well-being. Now, Andrea is just starting the process of forming her second 5-year strategy for the Council, having previously planned, launched and driven the last one from the moment she arrived at the organisation in 2019. And clearly there's been a huge amount of change in the nursing sector in that time, not least caused by the COVID pandemic in 2020, the first ever industrial action by nurses in 2022, and of course pressure on skills in the sector caused by Brexit. All of which we will discuss today, I'm sure. So let's find out about the challenges ahead. Welcome, Andrea. Thanks for joining me on the Regulation Podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. I love talking about regulation.
Brilliant. Well, Andrea, as I explained, you're Chief Executive and Registrar at the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and you're at the start of this journey to form the organisation's new 5-year strategy. But before we dig into that, can you just explain a bit more about the NMC and your role? It's to promote and uphold high professional standards in nursing and midwifery. It's about protecting the public and it's inspiring public confidence. So how do you do that?
Well, one of the things that we did when we created our last strategy was to be absolutely clear about what are the 3 things that we're here to do. So we start off with regulation. We're here to regulate, to protect the public, as you quite rightly say, promote those high standards. So we're setting standards for nursing and midwifery practice and for their education. We quality assure that education to make sure that the people who are coming onto the register are right and proper to do so. We maintain the register, both for those people coming from overseas as well as our domestic graduates, and we investigate concerns through our fitness to practice process. So that's the regulation, that's the cornerstone of it. But what we want to do is to do that in a supportive way, to support our professionals to deliver on those standards and expectations, but also to support the public in terms of their work with us as well. And last but not least, given that regulatory role, and if we do it in a supportive way, we sit on a goldmine of evidence. And so what we want to be able to do is to use that insight to influence workplace policy, the future of nursing and midwifery, so that people really can get that safe, kind, effective nursing and midwifery care, now and into the future.
It's interesting because there is this there's this enforcement part, and then there's the support part, the investigation, but also the supporting of the professionals. It sounds like a balancing act. It's like, how do you prioritise, where you put your resources?
Well, it is a balancing act, and we are in the middle, actually, of doing a bit of a prioritisation exercise because we are facing some significant challenges in our fitness to practice process. Because when we entered the pandemic, we had about 4,000 cases in our caseload, and because of various reasons in that first year of the pandemic, it rose massively to about 6,000, and we've been trying very, very hard ever since to bring that down and to deal with cases much more quickly than we had been. But it's proving very stubborn, and we're actually seeing an increase in referrals at the moment as well. So we are reprioritising, shifting resources so that we can really, really focus on that. But as you quite rightly say, we can't lose sight of what it is that we need to do to enable the professions to do the right and proper things in the future anyway. So we don't want to just be waiting for things to go wrong and pick up the pieces. So we are still trying to make sure that we are focusing on looking at specific areas of practice, and a particular area at the moment is advanced practice. What should we be doing about that? Is there a public protection issue that we need to address? So we're continuing to work on those things, but absolutely prioritising trying to make sure that we deal with those concerns swiftly and safely.
Bringing that reality right up to date, of course, there's a current investigation underway by the NMC into what the Guardian newspaper described recently as an industrial scale qualifications fraud involving a testing centre in Nigeria, potentially involving hundreds of nurses. I mean, clearly, you seem to be on the front foot with this issue, since becoming aware of the problem in May last year. But, I mean, how common is a problem like that? How big an issue is it for you right now?
It's a big issue in a variety of different ways, because obviously maintaining the integrity of the register, wherever people are coming from, if they're graduates from the UK or if they're coming to us from overseas, we've absolutely got to make sure that people are capable and competent when they come onto the register. So the process by which we do that is very important. The second thing to say is that we have tried very hard to look at this situation with real care, because what we don't want to be doing is making a blanket decision for people and because we'll be affecting people's lives. If they're coming into this country and they are working in health and social care, and we end up saying, actually, you can't be on our register, then that is going to have a profound effect on them. So we're trying to do it really carefully, and that obviously takes a lot of effort. So it has been a big issue for us. We have worked very carefully with lots of different organisations, including representative bodies, to provide support to those individuals so that they know what it is that we're looking at, what we need to be doing. And we're now going through some of the specific regulatory processes where it may mean that we will be taking some people off the register and also not allowing others onto it.
Well, you also talk about influencing health and social care, sharing intelligence from regulatory activities to support workforce planning and sector-wide decision-making. As you say, there's a lot of pressure on resources right now in the health sector. You say we use our voice to speak up for healthy and inclusive working environments for our professionals. I mean, that sounds like quite a political role. I mean, is it?
No, not really. I mean, I think it's not political in the sense of it being big P party politics. And we're not a trade union representing members, and we're not a campaigning or a lobby group. But we have insight. We do understand, we can see things that are happening. So let me give you one example, which is that we know that our register is changing, and about 30% of our register come from Black and other minority ethnic backgrounds, what we might better call the global majority. We also know that they face racism and discrimination in the workplace, both from colleagues and from the public. And we also know that has an impact on safety. So it's something that we need to be talking about, and it's something that we need to be raising as an issue, because if those individuals, some of whom have come thousands of miles to work here and to care for our loved ones, we need to make sure that they are being treated properly and supported appropriately, because that's the way that we get great care. So that's the sort of thing that I think that we need to be using our voice to influence, and to make sure that the professionals on our register are properly supported. And the reason for doing that is so that the public get the care that they expect.
Well, building on that, the House of Lords Industry and Regulators Committee has just completed its inquiry specifically into UK regulators. Amongst other things, it concluded that urgent reform was needed to improve the independence, accountability and the performance of UK regulators. I mean, clearly nursing and midwifery is a highly emotive, it's a difficult profession, and it claims the headlines, as we've seen this week, when things go wrong. But are the Lords right about the need for more of this independent oversight?
Well, I think it's very important for regulators to be scrutinised and to be held to account. And looking at what the House of Lords was examining, I mean, really their focus was around kind of industry and, the business sector, because actually from a health and social care perspective, frankly, I feel pretty scrutinised. So we already have an oversight body, the Professional Standards Authority, that reviews our performance every year against standards of good regulation. And those reports are made available publicly. Obviously, I've got a council of lay and registrant members who scrutinise the work that we do and hold me to account personally with the executive team for delivering on our strategy. And we're accountable to Parliament. So we can be taken to the Health and Social Care Select Committee to answer to them. And we're also working as a UK regulator. So whilst regulatory policy is held at Westminster, obviously all of our registrants are working in health and social care, which is a devolved matter for the four governments of the UK. So each of those politicians and organisations are asking us questions. And as I said, our struggles with our fitness to practice caseload at the moment, that has been escalated to the Secretary of State and to each of the ministers and the devolved administrations as well. So we're answering to all of them in terms of what action we're taking to address that. So my independence is thoroughly tested, I think it's fair to say.
It sounds like there is quite a lot of scrutiny going on there. But let's take a few moments to look at a recent case which, of course, did hit the headlines, the Lucy Letby case. I mean, what would you say the nursing profession and the regulation of nursing has learnt in the wake of that awful case, which, amongst other things, highlighted how difficult it is to call out poor practice, deliberate or otherwise?
Well, I think actually we are still learning and digesting, to be honest, because this was very profound and it's absolutely horrifying. And, my thoughts and sympathies are just continue to be with the families who were just so dreadfully impacted by that case. And it's just horrific. And as I'm sure you know, we have the Thirlwall inquiry, which is now a public inquiry is going to be taking place. And Lady Justice Thirlwall is proceeding at pace with that and very thoroughly. And I think that that's going to have a profound effect on the nursing profession and on issues to do with speaking up and how we respond to concerns that people might be raising. In terms of what we might have already learned, I think there's two things that I would say. One is that importance of speaking up. It's fundamental in the code of conduct for nurses, midwives and nursing associates that they should do so. But it's also fundamental, I think, for organisations to respond positively to that and to listen and to act when people do that, because, as you say, it's not easy. And the other thing, and I know that this is something that the inquiry is going to examine, is what have we learned from previous inquiries and have we taken those lessons on board? And the one that I would go to is the Beverley Allitt inquiry, where one of the things that came out of there was you've got to think the unthinkable. Nobody thought really, could it be? Could somebody, a nurse, a neonatal nurse who was supposed to be caring for newborn babies, could that person actually be the serial killer that she was convicted as? But when those concerns were being raised, we need to make sure that we are thinking the unthinkable, that we are going the extra mile to really understand what it is that could be happening so that we can put it right.
Well, I get that, and I suppose I also understand that as an organisation, you're not there to represent the professionals, but as we said earlier, you are there to provide support for them, and I suppose that's where you come into this balancing act of the supporting versus the regulating, and I suppose that's an area which you're presumably working through right now.
How do we make sure that we share the insights that we've got, the lessons that we're learning about this, both for our own practice, but also for the practice of nurses and midwives. And we've done this in other areas. So, for example, other inquiries that have happened, like the Donna Rockenden review into Shrewsbury and Telford maternity services, we have looked at what are the issues that came out of that and mapped that across to our standards for midwifery proficiencies to make sure that they're aligned and they're consistent. So we have been able, as a consequence of that, to say, our future midwife standards, which we introduced in 2019, now thoroughly embedded in education, need to be thoroughly embedded in practice. And if we do that, it's not the only answer, because there's a big multidisciplinary team. It's not just midwives. But, if we were able to say that was happening, then we would go a long, long way to addressing some of the issues that Donna Rockenden identified there. So, that's the way that I think that we've got to be working.
Lots and lots of learning. And I suppose that learning is, I imagine, being fed right now into the creation of your strategy for the next 5 years. So perhaps, let's take a few moments to look at what you perhaps learned over the time that you've been at the NMC since joining in 2019. When you arrived, you said that you crisscrossed the UK to seek out views. You highlighted issues such as a failure to hear the patient's voice, which helped you form your last strategy. The COVID pandemic came about in 2019. You said at that stage that the new virus demonstrated the vulnerability of the health systems when faced with the disease. But of course, it escalated a lot more after you said that. What did it teach you about agility?
Oh, what a great question. COVID-19 taught both the Nursing and Midwifery Council, but I think everybody involved in health and social care, a huge amount about agility. We did so much in those early months when faced with the pandemic to do things that we'd never imagined. So, for example, we didn't have the legal powers to do so, but the government wanted us to establish a temporary register so that additional nurses and midwives could come back into the workforce or come from overseas to supplement the nursing midwifery workforce at that stage. And like I say, we didn't have the legal powers. They had to pass the legislation. We had to set it all up. We had to work out how to do it. We did it in a month. It was incredible. We also had to look at how we could support students during that period of time. And again, that agility kind of went through all of the phases of the pandemic. So we introduced emergency standards in March 2020. Those turned into recovery standards, and then we had to amend the recovery standards when we got another wave. And so again and again, we were having to be agile, be responsive. And I think that what it also taught us was that you can be agile if you've got two things. The first is, have you got a good framework in terms of your frame of reference? And we'd had the absolute benefit of doing that work on the strategy and creating that framework around regulate, support and influence. And we were able to kind of refer to that to guide us in the decisions that we were making. And what we also did was establish our values to be fair, kind, ambitious and collaborative. And again, they guided us in the decisions that we made. And the second thing you need is collaboration, is to be able to work with partners. And I was so grateful for the fact that I'd had a year in post before the pandemic hit. So some of those relationships that I absolutely relied upon were there to help us and to be able to shortcut our way through some of the very difficult issues that we were facing.
Because it was an amazing, extraordinary time. You just think back to those images of the pressure that the health service on, the pressure that the nurses were on, the PPE they were having to wear, the PPE they didn't have, etc. So extraordinary time. But to be fair, the issues kept coming, Andrea. First the impact of Brexit, which is it's had a profound effect on staffing numbers. Then the pressures on the public purse post-COVID, leading to a huge challenge in social care. And then the cost of living crisis. The first ever nursing strike that's really challenged the health service. Change, it's clearly inevitable. But How has the succession of events impacted your ability to deliver the strategy that you're trying to enact?
Well, I think it's fair to say that it's knocked us off course a bit. I'm not going to kid you, because all of those things that you've just described, we didn't anticipate half of that when we were developing the strategy. So it has meant that some things have been delayed, some things we've had to defer, and it's introduced new challenges. So, the fact that we've got the increased caseload in fitness to practice has been a real challenge, both to our ability to deliver on other things because of, frankly, bandwidth, and also because of the resources that we need to dedicate to it. So one of the things that we've had to be agile about, and I'm personally gutted because I didn't want this to be the case, but is that we've had to delay the start of the next strategy because we're going to extend this one for another year, and so that we can complete some of those things and begin the next strategy period from 2026 onwards.
Oh, right. No, I hadn't appreciated that. So I hadn't appreciated that you'd actually had to delay.
Well, yes. Well, I mean, we've only recently made the decision to be honest, Anthony, and it was not something that I really wanted to. I kind of, like the rhythm of a 5-year strategy and then another 5-year strategy and keeping up that momentum. But we've got to be realistic about what we can achieve and the work that we need to do to work with our partners, work with colleagues within the organisation to make sure that, as we move into the next strategic period, we've done that properly. We're not going to stop doing the work in terms of developing it. It's just we'll expand the amount of time that we're going to do it over.
It sounds like it's made you slightly more realistic, pragmatic, flexible.
Yes, it has. I mean, I think it has impacted on our performance in a variety of different ways. We've done some good things during all of that. The kind of move to remote working and some of the changes that we made to the way that we deliver our regulatory processes been really positive. And, we want to harness that and move that on. But obviously, with the impact of the caseload, we need to make sure that we are addressing that, and that because that's the sort of thing that professional regulators get judged by, and rightly so.
Well, it sounds like it's probably in safe hands, Andrea, because let's just talk a bit about you. Before joining the NMC, you were Chief Inspector of Adult Social Care at the Care Quality Commission. It was a role that you were honoured with CBE in 2018 for. Before that, though, you had roles at the Social Care Institute for Excellence and the Appointments Commission, and you were also an Executive Director at the National Institute for Health and Clinical Excellence for 7 years. I mean, it's quite a regulation track record. What did this experience teach you along the way about regulation and about setting regulation up for success?
What it's taught me is that it's all about the people. It is absolutely all about the people, the public that we're here to serve, in terms of those people who are using health and social care services. It's also about the professions in this role, the providers in my last role. It's about those people that you regulate as well, and you need to have their trust and confidence. So what it's taught me is how important it is to listen and to understand the perspectives, the different perspectives that people have. Make sure that you are taking those things on board. Clearly, people will have sometimes diametrically opposing views. So, you've got to listen, and people can have their say, but they're not always going to have their way. I think it's fair to say, but you need to make sure that you're taking that into account. And you also need to think about how you can do this in a positive way. I think one of the reasons why I've been drawn to regulation is that it can make such a difference on a grand scale. So there are over 800,000 people on our register. But one of the things that I do say is we're not going to get safe, kind, effective care if they're all scared of us. So we've got to make sure that they feel that we do understand their pressures, their environment, the way that they're working, that we're providing them with the tools that we can as a regulator to support them to deliver that great care. And it's not just about us coming along when things go wrong.
Well, I noticed your career started as a trainee management accountant. I mean, it's fair to say that that order of thought and the process required for that career, it sounds like it makes good grounding for regulation. I don't know, or maybe not. I don't know. Can anybody from any background have a successful career in regulation?
It's really interesting that you've picked up on the accountancy, because there are things. I started off with a history degree, and then I couldn't get a job with a history degree in the 1980s, so that's when I went into accountancy. But actually, I use the skills from the history degree and from the accountancy every day. Analysis, problem solving, writing, communicating, presenting arguments, all of those sorts of things. And I think that they're generic skills. So I do think, to answer your question directly, you probably can bring any background into a regulatory role, but you've really got to care about it. And you've got to have a curiosity. And I think that I do have a curiosity that comes from those two aspects of my kind of academic and professional background. Although I never really wanted to be an accountant, it has to be said. But it has helped in terms of equipping me with the skills to be not just a regulator, but to be a chief executive as well, which ain't the easiest job in the world.
So what do you do when you're not at work? What takes your mind off of that, the day-to-day pressures of a really hard job in a really tricky sector?
Well, it's very important that you do step away, because these jobs are 24/7 and you're thinking about it. I dream about it, all of those sorts of things. So I like to go hiking, bit of physical exercise, up a mountain, love it. Really takes you out of yourself. I'm also very, very lucky that I live in London, and the cultural delights of the capital are fantastic. Cinema, theatre, music. I am just the luckiest woman. So that is great. Use all of that. And every now and again, go on a really good holiday.
Great stuff. Well, bringing you right back to the job in hand, let's talk a bit about the Institute of Regulation and its role. In the last regulation podcast with Matthew Gill of the Institute of Government, we discussed whether there had been a failure in public and political confidence in regulation. We touched on it with the House of Lords inquiry. I mentioned in education, in energy, and perhaps in social care, there are or have been a few high-profile failures. Do you agree? In which case, how can an organisation like the Institute of Regulation help to reverse this public confidence issue?
What I think is really helpful is for the Institute of Regulation to explain and amplify what regulators are here to do and how they do it, what the limits of what we can do are, and what the benefits are in terms of the public being able to rely upon a regulator to essentially advocate on their behalf. So I think that there's a good role for the Institute there, and perhaps through that, making sure that we're learning from each other, because generally the public don't really understand what regulation is about and what the limits are, and the fact that it's bound by statute in lots of ways, and all of those sorts of things. So I think trying to demystify us, that would be a good thing.
Great stuff. Well, let's just close out by talking a bit about the forming this new strategy for the 5 years ahead, 2026 to 2031, I think as it is now. People's voices are at the heart of your strategy, and you've done some analysis already. And I know it's going to be probably too early for you to say exactly what's in it, but give us a preview of the kind of themes that you are probably going to be putting in your strategy going forward.
Well, I think that we obviously need to be understanding what is happening in the health and social care world at the moment, and that, as you say, is challenging and is changing. So I think that one of the things that we've got to do is to anticipate some of that. So do a lot of horizon scanning, do a lot of talking to our partners about what it is that they think that we should be doing. And interestingly, while you can tell from the way that I've been speaking through this podcast, what's at the forefront of my mind is making sure that we're tackling the fitness to practice caseload, doing that safely and swiftly. But actually, what's really worrying people out there is the workforce. Do we have enough nurses and midwives? Are they properly trained? Do they have the skills? Etc., etc. So I think that one of the things that we are going to have to be thinking about, and we already are trying to do this, is what can we do to support the implementation of the workforce strategies across the 4 countries of the UK? Well,
fortunately, we are seeing a record number of nurses and midwives working in the NHS. And I think in December, you reported a record of 808,488 nurses. It's up in the last 6 months, and it's up since September 2018. But you also report a steady change in the age profile of the register. It's getting younger. How does that impact your strategic thinking? You've got more nurses and they're getting younger. Do you have to make different priorities?
I think that it is something that is influencing us, definitely, because there are 2 aspects. One is, what support do people get in their early careers? So Professor Alison Leary, who is one of our registrants, but is a professor in workforce strategy as well, talks about the rookie factor. Talks about sort of, if you've got an increasingly young workforce, then, they may not have the experience, the ability to respond to some of the things that they may be facing. So that, I think, means that it's ever more important for us to be highlighting what it is that people need in those early stages of their career. Absolutely. So we call it preceptorship in terms of the support that newly qualified professionals get. But I think that also needs to apply for those who are coming to us from overseas as well. But the second thing is understanding why it is that people are leaving the register. And what can we do about that? So we conduct a leaver survey every year and we ask that question. And whilst retirement continues obviously to be the major reason, folk can retire at any stage. So why are you doing it now? And people are telling us that they're doing it earlier than they would have anticipated. And that's because of workforce pressures. And so one of the things that we're highlighting back to professional leaders is that they need to be thinking about how are they retaining people in the nursing and midwifery register, so that they can, have flexible ways of working, so that that we can still benefit from their wisdom and experience and expertise to support the younger graduates coming through.
Lessons, I'm sure, from the COVID times there. I'm sure also. Lastly, you mentioned just now that the international recruitment is increasing, and there's now, I think, a near 50-50 split in recruitment between the UK and internationally educated nurses and midwives. How does that impact your thinking? We spoke earlier about the investigation you got on, which is in a specific case, but I imagine that means you have to put a bit more resource into that kind of area, do you?
Yes, indeed. So our international registration focus is very important in terms of making sure that is robust. As we were discussing earlier, really proactively searching out and making sure that if there are problems, we are dealing with those. And also about making sure that those internationally educated nurses and midwives who are coming over, that they are properly supported as well. And because they are making up, you said that the recruitment is 50-50 now, but in terms of the overall picture of the register, 1 in 5 of the nurses, midwives and nursing associates on the register are coming from overseas. Significant. And we need to make sure that they are being properly supported. And not just we do a welcome to the UK and explaining the role of the Nursing and Midwifery Council, all those kind of things. But I think it's really important that we are encouraging employers to ensure that the environment in which those nurses, midwives are coming into is culturally competent as well. So that the people who are going to be working alongside those internationally educated professionals understand their perspectives too, and are ready and willing to provide support and explain and make sure that they can come into the workforce and progress and thrive as we would want them to do.
Interesting times ahead for sure. not least, and I'll finish on this, Andrea, it's an election year. Both the Tories and Labour, they're committed to the NHS, but they're also committed to regulatory reform. How would you describe, if there are any, the regulatory party dividing lines in your sector?
Well, we've got long anticipated, it has to be said, regulatory reform on the horizon. And what I would say is that it's a party political neutral gift wrapped bit of regulatory reform that any incoming government, whatever colour they are, can pick up and run with. Because I think that, it's all about reducing burden, reducing bureaucracy, being more efficient, being able to protect the public better, less adversarial in our fitness to practice process, a whole host of things that we can do, which are really positive. A lot of work has already been done to prepare us for that. And, from my perspective, any incoming government, as I say, whatever colour, should be going, thank you very much, let's just get on with it.
So when you're setting your strategy, are you looking forward to a difficult time or embracing a moment of opportunity?
So I am reminded of a wonderful quote, which is about life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain. And I think that's what we've got to do. Because there are always going to be storms. There's always going to be challenges. But we can make the most of those opportunities. We can dance in the rain. We can make a difference. That's what we should be doing.
Andrea, I think you are thriving dancing in the rain there. So look, challenging times ahead. Thanks so much for joining me on the Regulation Podcast today. It's a huge subject, and I think we've made a start in really unpacking some of the challenges facing the sector and explaining how better regulation might actually start to deliver better services. So, Andrea, thanks so much for joining me.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you.
Great. Well, it is an interesting, important time for the whole regulation profession. We've got an interesting time ahead with the general election coming, but that's all we've got time for today. But in the meantime, we do have more regulation podcasts planned and more guests to talk to as we continue to get stuck into some of the big issues faced across the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Institute of Regulation website, www.ioregulation.org, where you'll find a huge amount of information about the Institute, how you can get involved, and of course about the issues and challenges faced across regulation. And of course you'll find details of all the podcasts that we've recorded to date. So thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Andrea, and on behalf of the Institute of Regulation, I look forward to seeing you again very soon.